Hey everyone, this is Jim from rangestation.com. This video is going to go over the installation of my Skyjacker 3.5 inch lift kit on my 2021 Ford Ranger FX4 that I call TRS3. Now here you can see the truck. I've got it in the shop, it's on jack stands. I've removed the front skid plate, I've removed the front wheels, and now it's time to get into disconnecting everything and getting the new kit installed. So let's get started. This is the part that I don't like about putting suspension lifts on these newer Rangers, is you have to unplug these three plugs on the power steering down here. And you need to make sure that you remember to slide these locking clips back, slide that all the way back before you push in there where my thumb is, right? You push that in and then you can pull it off. What I don't like about this is that you could potentially break these things, especially on older Rangers. So this one's 2021, this is still pretty new, but I still worry about breaking these plastic plugs, trying to unplug them. On the large plug on the bottom, this clip slides backwards as well, and it slides back, it doesn't pull down. So, but it's pretty dirty under here, and the clip didn't want to move that freely, so I just spray a little bit of WD-40 around it to lubricate it up to get it to slide a little easier. So I can get it unlocked without breaking this clip. Alright, 2 plugs disconnected, 1 more to go. Alright, next I'm going to remove this ABS line, alright, from the upper control arm. It's got these plastic retaining clips up here that hold it to it. So I'm just using a plastic trim tool remover to get it under there. And hopefully remove them without breaking them. Alright, I had to put the camera down for a minute to use 2 hands on this, but here you can see that fastener, that plastic fastener, it goes up the upper control arm. So I got this one, and we got one back there to remove yet. Takes a little force, but it comes off. Alright, the next thing is to remove this bracket here that holds the ABS wire to the front of the knuckle. It just comes off with an 8mm socket or wrench. It's not on there very tight. I like to always take the bolts that I take out and just kind of screw them back in where they belong. So I'm going to reinstall this. I won't be looking all over for this 8mm bolt. It's just right there when I go to put the bracket back on. And now I need to remove the brake line bracket off the back side of the knuckle. And again, this is just not there very tight. And this one's an 8mm, or I'm sorry, 10mm. And again, when I get this off here, I'm just going to reinsert the bolt right back into the knuckle here so I don't lose it. Alright, I loosened the nut here on the tie rod end, and I'm going to hit it with a hammer. It's going to drop out. And then to remove this upper sway bar link, this 18mm nut, right? But you can see here where this Allen wrench will fit in this. If you try to put a socket on this, more likely it's just going to turn. One thing you can do to make it a little easier is ahead of time just put a little bit of PV Blaster WD-40 on here, a little penetrant on the threads. Okay. But what I'm going to do, it helps if I have the right size wrench. Oh, here we go. 18mm. So it's in there too deep. I can't get the wrench on like that. Of course can't. If I put a socket on, then I can't use this. So what I'm going to do is put this on here. I'm going to put this on here. And I'm going to push down both ways. So I'm going to push down this way with the Allen wrench, and this way with the open wrench. And get them loose like this. and take that off. Alright, after we get the sway bar disconnected up here, the next step in instructions is to remove the brake caliper. And there are two 18mm bolts back here that hold it on. Not a lot of room to break it loose, the wrench. I can use my long ratcheting breaker bar here. There we go. And once I get it loose, I can switch to just a regular ratchet. And I need to put a little extension on this to clear. Alrighty. My 1/2-inch ratchet and breaker bar was too fit on the bottom bolt here for the caliper, and I couldn't get with the 18mm wrench. I couldn't get any room to break it loose. So a little trick I like to use is, here's my 3/8" ratchet, but I need to put some leverage on it to actually get that to break loose. So I just have a 5/8" socket here on a 3/8 extension. I slide it over it, make a breaker bar, and then push down. Easy peasy. Alright, once I got the brake caliper off, I hung it up here under the truck using a bungee cord, making sure that there's no tension on the brake hose. So the caliper off and the rotor off, I have to remove this 36mm nut, and this whole hub assembly spins when you're trying to turn it. So what I did was put the wheel back on. This little plastic piece on the back side of it, where it locks in, you could just kind of push them back and push it out in one snap. So I took that out so I can get to this, put the wheel back on, and lowered it off the jack so it was making contact with the ground, so it would hold it in place. So then I can then loosen it up, and I've already broke it loose, but so I just need to take the wheel back off and continue. All right, next, have to remove this CV axle from this hub, and directions are saying that I'm going to have to probably push this in with a punch and a hammer. So I got my punch here and a small sledgehammer. There. Not much, didn't take much. Actually, ball peen hammer would have done that pretty easily. Alright, with the lower control arm supported with my floor jack, I'm going to loosen the nut on the upper ball joint. Okay. And again, just like we did on the lower one, we're going to strike this with a ball peen hammer to get this to separate and come loose. There we go. And now that we've got this loose, I'm going to take the nut off. It's be a lot faster if I used a ratchet.
Next, we're going to remove the, well, not remove, but we're going to loosen the lower ball joint nut. 21mm wrench. And then we have to strike this one also to get it to come loose. All right, I found out it was easier to hit it on the front side over here than on the back side. Get a better shot of it here. Had to hit it several times, but it finally dropped down, came loose. All right, something I was supposed to do and didn't do was when I loosened up this tie rod, or when I got it dropped down, I was supposed to completely remove it, and it's wanting to spin on me here, so I'm using a 8mm wrench to hold the ball joint, hold the joint in place, so I can get this nut loose. There we go. And another thing that I did not see in the directions was this wheel speed sensor. Wow, 8mm wrench down there. That is going to have to come out before I can pull this knuckle off here. All right, with that sensor out, all right, here's the sensor. I put the 8mm nut back in it, or the bolt back in it, so I don't lose it. And then I got some of the blue shop towels I use. I ripped some off and just kind of rolled up and stuck down in the hole there for the sensor so dirt doesn't get in there. Now to remove the knuckle. There we go. All right, the knuckle's been removed. Now comes the strut. With the knuckle removed, we're going to remove the 3 15mm nuts on top of the strut. Now remove the nuts from the bottom of the strut with 18mm socket. You can see here where I took a paint pen and I marked this alignment cam bolt so I can take this apart and put it back together. I'm going to have to remove this lower control arm to get this strut out. This is a 21 and 24mm. So using the 24 on ratcheting breaker bar here on this side. Once I loosened the bolts on the lower control arm, it was able to swing down all the way which then allowed me to easily pull the strut assembly out. So now I just got to get the spacer installed and new upper control arms. All right, I marked the coil spring and the coil seat on the strut. Basically, I'm marking everything, so when I take it apart, I'll know how to put it back together so it all lines up properly. All right, I've used a strut spring compressor to compress the spring in. Up top there you can see the new spacer. Now I just need to take the top of it off, the cap of it off, so I can disassemble it. I have removed the top nut up here. After compressing the spring, putting it in my vise. Now it's time to take it all apart. Now to disassemble everything off of here. Gonna take the coil spring off here. It's interesting here, this is a 2021 with like 35,000 miles on it. I have not driven it hard off-road. It had 16,000 miles on it, I think, when I bought it. But this piece up here is already cracked from this bump stop. So, makes me wonder what the previous owner did with it. But see this piece right here? Seems like this goes up and hits that. Well, it does go up and hit it, but it will come off. So I have to take it off like that. Alright, this piece is going to have to come off so you can see where after I took everything off, I marked a line on there to line that back up to go back on. Now the strut ring spacer goes on. And we are going to put this back in place. Line those marks back up. Reattach this piece. Tape it down over it to the seating. Next we install the bump stop. The bump stop pad, the bump stop, I'll put on the dust shield and this top cap piece. Gotta put the strut spring back on. Make sure all my alignment marks line up. Skyjacker kit comes with this upper spacer. And on some of these spacer kits, you'll find that you have to put these studs in. They don't come with the studs in them. The Skyjacker kit is not like that. The studs, the bolts up here, are welded in place. So that's one thing about this kit. You don't have to mess around with hammering the studs in and then putting it all together. It's already welded together for you. Now I'm going to install the spacer on top of the strut cap. There we go, slide around that locating pin. There we go. And now to put this back on the strut spring on the strut. And you can see the spot up here in the rubber part where the coil spring goes. Now we got the spacer on. We're going to tighten it down and we're going to use the factory nuts for the strut. And these nuts up here, well, these bolts up here, you're going to use the nuts that are going to come with the Skyjacker kit. But the factory nuts are what holds down the spacer. Need to make sure it doesn't spin like that. Need to make sure your alignment marks all stay where they're supposed to be. I don't think tightening the spring compressors is going to bring this down anymore, so that I can get that up there. And I could try to press down on it, put the nuts on. It almost could be a two-person job, but I'm going to try something different. I'm going to put this ratchet strap on here. I ran around the bottom of the vise. See if I can tighten this up and pull it down enough to get the thread started. Yeah, it is almost right there. It's just a little bit more. Let's try this again. I'm sure somebody would tell me that that's crazy for doing it that way, but it works. When you reassemble this strut, it's important before you remove these spring compressors that you make sure that every one of your little alignment marks line up where they're supposed to. Otherwise, this is not going to fit, either not fit back properly, or it's going to affect the height of it a little bit. Yeah, it is time to take out the lower, or I'm sorry, take out the upper control arm. And this is all done with 18 and 21 millimeter sockets or wrenches. Hey everybody, this is the Skyjacker upper strut spacer that comes with the 3.5 inch kit for the 2019 and newer Ford Ranger. Now this spacer, this is not aluminum, this is not any kind of plastic or nylon, whatever they're made out of. This is made out of nice 3/16 steel plate. The studs up here are welded in. This isn't anything where you have to press them in. It's a nice little touch that I like about this kit versus some of the other kits that are out there. This is the beefy tubular steel upper control arm that comes in the Skyjacker kit. Again, nice heavy duty. It's got a nice gusset welded in here, very strong. The reason I chose Skyjacker is I've been using their system since the 90s. Matter of fact, the kit on my 96 Ranger is already 18 years old, still performs flawlessly. And if you've ever seen that truck on the trail, you know that truck will go anywhere where I point it. So I chose to stick with Skyjacker. Might not be the cheapest kit out there, but I think it's the strongest kit out there. Not knocking any of those other kits that are out there, but Skyjacker is definitely my choice. Definitely something you should look into. Now that I got the old upper control arm out, it's time to install the new upper control arm. time to reinstall the strut. I used a small bungee cord to hold this upper control arm, keep it out of my way. Alrighty. I already need to invest in a 15mm ratchet wrench. It's weird to have a 13, 14, 16mm ratchet wrench, but no 15. Put that on my shopping list. Now I gotta tighten that all the way up. It needs Alright, so I ran into a pretty significant problem here when I was putting the strut in. The lower strut mounts, those studs, bolts, whatever you want to call them, they're studs, they did not want to go into the lower control arm. There was no way that they were going to line up to make it into the holes. Now what some manufacturers do is they suggest that you take those studs out, put the strut in, and then reinstall those studs, and those studs can be pretty difficult to press out of there. The other problem is that little bar area down there that goes through that bushing, when you reinstall the strut is now flipped around the opposite direction. So those that little bar in there that those lower studs are in, they're pointing the wrong direction, and it's very tight in that bushing, and it's really hard to grab them with any kind of a wrench and try to spin them around to line them the right way. What I ended up doing with this is I took out the lower control arm bolts. I had already loosened them up, and I had marked the alignment on them, you know, I could tighten them all back up so that it all goes back to the way it's supposed to be, whatever. But what I did was I just went ahead and took them completely out, dropped the lower control arm, and got the strut into the lower control arm, and then pushed the control arm back up into the mounts and put the alignment cam bolts into it and got it all back together. So if you're having problems getting the lower strut in, this is my suggestion. Just drop the lower control arm, get the strut bolted up, and then reinstall the lower control arm. Now it's time to reinstall the knuckle. I'm going to reinstall or get the shaft in here. Alright, so I'm installing the steering knuckle back on here. I've ran the axle shaft through it, through the hub assembly. I've got the nut on the bottom down here. And I'm going to put the upper ball joint in. Now, there's a spacer that Skyjacker includes in this. And this spacer, this washer has to go between the nut and the knuckle to make sure that this all lines up properly, that the pin and everything for this lines up. Alrighty. Stop the cotter pin. There you go. Once the knuckle's on, I'm going to put this rotor back on. I'm going to put a lug nut on here to hold it in place. And now we're going to put the axle nut back on here. I'll set the tire back on here and use that to hold this assembly in place, to tighten it back up. Just like when I took it apart, I used the tire on here to hold it in place so I could break it apart. Next, I'm going to reinstall the brake caliper. You can see where this had thread locker on it. See, this had thread locker on it. The Skyjacker kit comes with new thread locker, so we're going to put some thread locker on this. Brake caliper back on. We're going to reattach the brake line to the steering knuckle. It's going to get tightened up with a 10mm wrench. Going to reinstall speed sensor. That gets tightened up with an 8mm. And then reinstall this line up here. Again, this uses an 8mm. And then these two plastic clips are going to go into the Skyjacker arm. All right, need to install the steering link up here, tie right in, and this will not go back in place unless you lift the lower control arm up at the jack. So I've lifted it up, and there we go. Install the nut and tighten this with a 21 millimeter. I'm going to take an 8 millimeter and put it on top of the ball joint here so it doesn't spin, so I can tighten this up. And last but not least, reinstall the sway bar link. Alright, at the moment, the sway bar link does not want to go in. Cannot get this down far enough. Yeah, at this point, jacking it up, I'm just taking off the jack stand. So, alright, not exactly pretty, but it works. I couldn't get the sway bar link to line up with the knuckle. It was up too high, and jacking the knuckle up got it close, but then the whole truck's coming off the jack stand, so I couldn't go any further. So what I did was I took a ratchet strap and wrapped it around the lower control arm and the sway bar, and then hooked it onto the jack so I could pull everything down and line up the hole so I could put the upper sway bar link on. Alright, once the front strut spacers are installed and the struts are all reassembled, the front end's all back together, the last part is the front differential. You're going to have to cut some of the bracketry. You're going to cut these pieces out as templates, and then you're going to be bolting on these pieces right here. Alright, have to remove this 13 millimeter bolt from the front differential. Okay, which is not 13 millimeter. I swear the directions said 13. Check 15. And now we'll remove this double shear brace. Skyjacker has a new bracket. Now this is going to go basically here. So actually it's going to fit inside that, but we need to cut the top of this off. And as you can see, this is a lot thicker. This is like 3/16, where this is like 1/8 inch right here. So we're going to cut this off, and this hole here is going to bolt to this hole up here. So first thing you need to do is use the paper template that Skyjacker includes. So I can use a paint pen here and mark my cut. There's that side. Nice thing about using these yellow paint markers, the same one I used to mark the alignment. Those marks up here in the alignment cam bolts. It's a lot easier to see versus using like a black permanent marker on here. Once you start cutting it, you're going to be able to clearly see the line as you cut. With this all cut, make room. Kind of got a not the cleanest looking cut up there. It's kind of hard to get into laying under the truck, but the new piece fits now. Can use this special nut that Skyjacker provided. Gloves about worthless. See, they're all ripped up. Skyjacker directions doesn't mention bolting this back to this bracket, and when I look at the diagram with the pictures, their bracket has a nut welder right there, and this bracket does not have that nut welder right there. So this is the old nut, and the bracket that I had taken off, if I can find it here, this shear bracket has a nut in it. Right, so that's how that all bolts together. Obviously not using that anymore. I mean, there's just no way that's going to go on there. So I'm guessing that, you know, they give a new bolt to run down through here and go into a nut there, but there's no nut on that. And they don't include a nut to go with this, which I think this is just all standard size, so I should have a nut to go with it, but this is definitely something I'm going to have to address Skyjacker with. Alright, I've had to do some trial and error here, some fitting and refitting. So got this top part of this factory bracket cut off. This Skyjacker bracket in the diagram, in the directions, shows a nut welded on there, and there's not one on here. So I'm going to have to contact them about that. But it's just a nut, so I can work around that. What I've done is I've ran this bolt down through the supply bolt that came with the kit. I ran it down through the differential, the axle up here. So what I'm going to do is get that in there. And now use this nut. Like these gloves coming apart, aren't they about worthless? I'm clearly going to have to, the axle's forward a little bit, so I'm going to have to pull back in with this nut. Goodbye, gloves. Alright, I was kind of having a hard time getting that on there, so I put the throw locker actually in the nut. And I'm still going to install a lock washer on here. So just a little extra protection. Already drilled out this hole. Washer and lock nut on the back side of this. I have to remove the main bolt that goes to the rubber bushing here for the front differential. That's on the driver's side, and I have a breaker bar on this bolt, and I'm having a hard time getting this loose. It's on here so tight, so I'm literally pushing the breaker bar with my foot, doing leg presses. All right, I got it loose enough. All right, I'm gonna pause and remove this bolt. Need to remove this bracket on the driver's side of the vehicle for the front differential. So this bolts in from the back side, goes to the big rubber bushing, and then these two have 18 millimeter nuts on them, which I'm in the process of removing. That is actually going to get replaced with that bracket right there. Alright, the directions wants me to trim off the bracket on the other side, so I'm not going to put this on until I get to that one, because it's not calling for this one yet. Now we got to do template on the driver's side over here. This is where the hole, factory hole is on this. So we're going to line it up like that. This work better if I took the cap off. I actually cut a slit in this line to try to okay, whatever. And punch the hole in there, in there. All right, we're basically shaving off that much. And drilling holes right there. And I definitely need to make sure that I don't cut in the differential mount when I cut that. Just doing a little at a time because I don't want to cut into the mount. Actually, I don't want to cut into the differential mount, that part of it. I got this bracket trimmed. Started with the cutoff tool on my grinder, but I was getting too close to the power steering up there, so I switched to my Sawzall and finished it off. And now, where these yellow dots are, I have to drill those holes out to mount the new bracket. I finally got those holes up there drilled, and the way I was able to do that was on this side. I was able to raise and lower the differential out of my way. There we go. And I could actually go in it from back here and drill the holes out. Trying to drill from the other way, the lower control arm got in the way of the drill. So this is finally together. Got the brackets on both sides. Factory bolt going back through. The rubber bushing there in the front differential. And then the Skyjacker replacement lock nut and washer. Alright, with the U-bolts off and the rear of the truck, the frame well, the hitch frame part back there, supported on jack stand. I was able to lower the axle so it separates from the leaf spring. Now you're going to see that there's a pin here and a hole here that the pin goes into, that locating pin. This block has a pin and a hole. I'm going to put the block in there, and I'm going to lower that spring down, make sure it goes in the hole, and then put the new bolts on. One of the problems with using a floor jack is that when you lower the axle and it moves away from the spring and it's out of that locating pin, the axle can actually roll backwards with the jack. So when I went to put this all back together, the pin didn't line up. So all I had to do was just take a ratchet strap, right? Just took it to the axle and up here at the frame, and then just tightened up a little bit, pulled the axle forward, and all the pins lined up and went together. This axle nut won't come loose, and I don't have an impact, but what I use in lieu of an impact is a breaker bar with about a 4 or 5 foot pipe over it. It gives me plenty of leverage. There we go. Oh goodness.
This video wasn't meant to be a how-to, but more of showing you what I went through when I installed the kit onto my truck. So hopefully if you run into any problems, or if you just want to kind of get an idea of what you're getting yourself into, this video will help you. I want to thank Skyjacker for providing the 3.5-inch lift kit for this Ranger. As I've said before, I've been using their lift kit since the 90s. They've been flawless for me, and I will continue to use them as long as they offer a product for the Ford Ranger. Here's the Ranger with the 3.5-inch Skyjacker lift kit installed, along with Thunderer Track Grip MT 33.5-inch tires on Pro Comp wheels. This picture was taken during our 2023 fall adventure at Land Between the Lakes, and I would invite you to check the Range Station website and our forum to see when our next off-road events are going to be, and come out and join me.